Welcome in for another edition of Betting After Dark with America's Best Racing. I'm Anita Marks, the star of our show, Ashley Mailloux, getting everybody ready. Why are you rolling your eyes? You are the star of the show. Don't play humble on this Wednesday evening, Missy. You are the star of the show, getting everybody ready for the Breeders' Cup. This is kind of like, don't you feel, Ashley? This is kind of like everybody's like last hurrah, like this is everybody's like last. This is kind of, I know it's not the Super Bowl. The Kentucky Derby is kind of like the Super Bowl. I get that, but it kind of has that feel right now. Don't you? Aren't you?
Yeah, I
feeling
think
that?
it's kind of like the Stanley Cup, whatever you want, the NBA, like the finals. I view it that way. I think when you think about 3-year-olds specifically, everyone thinks Triple Crown, but to me, I think this is the best 2 days of racing in the whole calendar. Just because you're seeing the best of the best in each division, and they all square off as long as they make the starting gate.
So we're really excited about it for all your everything. You want to be in the know. You want to let's just be honest. You want to win some money this weekend. This is the only place to be, and that's America's Best Racing. And they've got all the previews for you. Check them out, articles as well as a number of other shows, even beyond ours, to get you ready for this race weekend. So let's kick it off. Ashley, we're doing one race that is going to be on Friday, and then the remainder of the races that we're going to break down for everybody is on Saturday. And so the Friday race is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and Jackie's Warrior is really the premier horse here. Tell us all the reasons why a lot of people feel. I know this horse has been undefeated, but give us all the reasons why this horse has been so good and why probably a lot of money is going to be put on this horse on Friday.
Yeah, so when you're looking at the 2-year-olds, I mean, that's what the Juvenile is. So you already kind of got the Derby dream kind of in the back of everyone's mind. When you look at the horses in this race, they're going to be going a mile and a 16th on the dirt. The reason why Jackie's Warrior is the morning line favorite and likely the post time favorite is he's done nothing wrong in his career. He's 4 for 4. You kind of look at some other horses in here, they only have 1 or 2 starts under their belt, a good majority of them. In this case, this one has 4 starts under his belt. He's won every single time, and he's improved each start. And you see the big thing, too, he's also gained distance in each start. He started at the 5 furlong distance at Churchill when he broke his maiden. And then from there, he went from 6 furlong, 7/8, and then to a mile last time out. Coming out of that maiden special weight, they put him in a grade 2 at Saratoga, which is always going to be tough competition. Much the best in that performance. And even in those last 2 races, the hopeful a grade 1 and the Champagne, another grade 1. You're talking about a horse that's just kind of romped. This one, has been on the lead gate to wire in the last 3 starts. I don't think Jackie's Warrior necessarily needs the lead to win. Just kind of how these races have panned out. And really, how can you fault the horse? Nothing has gone wrong for him so far.
So any concern in regard to the distance in the track here? If there are any red flags here, any reservations that you don't feel that Jackie's Warrior could win it, is it the distance in the track? What is there one?
No, I don't think there's any reservations. I mean, kind of look at that performance last time out. The horse won by 5.5 and drew away on the field. There's only 5 other horses in the race. It was kind of the shortest group that he faced that day, but he beat Reinvestment Risk, who's in this race at 9-2 morning line. I think the big thing with Jackie's Warrior is already traveled to 3 tracks in 4 starts. So seems like this 2-year-old has no problem shipping around. And you kind of look, they did bring this one into Keeneland a little bit earlier than some other runners, and does have 2 published breezes at Keeneland, and both of them are pretty sharp. So I really am not concerned about Keeneland. Definitely not the distance. We're only going a 16th of a mile further than the last start, so should be just fine.
All right, let's talk about some other horses, just in case somebody wants to, spread the wealth or maybe pick an upset. Essential Quality. Now, from what I understand, this is a horse that has proven that it could win on this track, and also kind of like a little preview of potentially maybe next year's Kentucky Derby horse that might be entered in next year's Kentucky Derby. What can you tell us about Essential Quality?
So first off, I mean, this horse is really, really well bred. Godolphin bred this horse, a son of Tappet. You gotta love that. You see the hefty stud fee, 200,000, but you kind of see the horse had high hopes, and you can see the betting public had high hopes in the debut in that maiden special weight event at Churchill. I think the big thing is this horse went off as the favorite, drew clear by 4 lengths, and you kind of look at the trip. Didn't have a perfect trip, but really made it look easy. And I think the big thing is you see this horse didn't have to have the lead. They were only going 3/4 of a mile on the dirt, but this horse was kind of towards mid-pack, even a little further back early on, and rallied from off the pace. Now, last time out on the stretch out from the 6 furlongs to a mile and a 16th, now you're going 2 turns. This horse was much closer to the pace. They probably anticipated, kind of looking at maybe how the race was going to shape up, that they weren't going to go that fast. And you can see that from the fractions. My half was really respectable, 48-4, not on the quick side. So I think this horse kind of had the benefit of being close to the pace. And once again, this horse drew off. And I think the big thing is we saw a big improvement in the buyer numbers. I know we talk about this each and every show that we've done. Went from a 69 to an 88. It's a pretty big jump. So kind of like to see that. And this was, again, this horse only has 2 starts. Last time out, won a grade 1. Was a decent sized field of 9 runners. So I think this horse definitely is going to have no problems at the distance, staying at that same distance. And you mentioned kind of looking down the road. I think this is a horse that probably can go further as far as distance goes.
All right. What about sitting on go and doing a little research here? Not a horse that has a lot of speed and also drew outside. So, how's the jockey going to have to ride this horse to make sure that it has a chance of at least win, place, or show?
So when you talk about the jockey just on itself alone, you see Corey Lannery, who didn't have the best Keeneland fall meet. Everyone knows that, but Corey is very well accomplished, especially on the Kentucky circuit. So I have no doubts in his abilities here at Keeneland. Very familiar with the track. You got to look at this one, the 2 starts. Debuted going 5 furlongs at Ellis Park and was much the best again. I keep on using that phrase, but you see these horses have a pretty impressive maiden wins. This one won by 4 1/4. Took a lot of money in that race, was not the favorite, but once the horse kind of got out and was able to draw clear, stayed course. I think it was a pretty big performance. And then the big thing for me is the stretch out on distance. It's a little further than these other horses that we've seen. This is a horse going from 5/8 of a mile to a mile, a little bit more drastic. And I like that this horse was kind of further back early on and was able to make that late move, and you really drew clear once again. I mean, the horse didn't take any respect in the Iroquois, was 24-1 that day. Really big price, but to me, the performance stood out. I'm always kind of looking for prices. So this is a horse for me out of the Dale Romans barn that I would endorse underneath on my tickets. A big thing is going to be how the pace sets up. And I just think if you're kind of looking at just sitting on the goes past performances and you look at the horse to the inside, the horses to the outside, it seems to me that there are going to be a lot of horses that potentially could want the lead. I don't think it's going to be like a 4 or 5-way battle early on. I think that'd be kind of ridiculous, but I'm curious to see how fast they'll go, and maybe sitting on a go will be able to kind of rally from off the pace. But the big thing I will say is last time out going a mile at Churchill, they did go 23 and 45 and 3 to the half. So he definitely had some tempo to run at. And I don't think they're going to go that fast. And, it could happen. You never know. But I will say the race really did shape up for him last time, which is why, while the performance was big, I'd only use him kind of underneath on a ticket.
All right, one more horse I want to tee up for you, and that's Reinvestment Rick, bridesmaid to Jackie's Warrior. And in looking at that race, I want to imagine not a lot of speed in that race to help Reinvestment Risk kind of make some headway. So are you looking at the speed in this race and how I love how because I do this as well. When I handicap football games, I call it game script. And so it's one thing that I've learned in working with you this season is how you envision how a race is going to play out. So do you feel that the way that this race might play out can benefit Reinvestment Rick this time around? Third time's a charm, or no?
I think it potentially could. I do have reservations about Reinvestment Risk. Just seeing those last 2, has been beaten by Jackie's Warrior in both, and wasn't like any match. Really wasn't going to get the job done, especially last time out. This was a horse that was clear of the other runners by a lot, but the fact that you're still getting beat by 5.5 by another horse in here, and in the previous start you were beaten by 2 1/4, that's slightly concerning for me. I thought the Hopeful was probably a better performance, but this is the horse, when he made the debut, started to get a lot of hype around him. I mean, it was a really big performance. You saw the buyer number came back a 90 on the debut, very, very high. So for me, I think the big thing with Reinvestment Risk is, yes, you've mentioned it. You got to figure out how you think the pace is going to set up, which to me is still a little murky, except for Jackie's Warrior is probably I mean, gonna be forwardly placed. I mean, you can't take that out of just looking at the races. I mean, Jackie's Warrior has been on the lead in the last 3 from the get-go. Reinvestment risk, probably in a best case scenario, is going to sit off the leaders not too far back and hope that someone presses Jackie's Warrior and gets that kind of pace that you were talking about. But the concern that I have is in the hopeful. They did go pretty strong fractions, 22 and 2, 44 and 4, 108 and 1. And then from there still wasn't getting the job done. Jackie's Warrior still had enough left. So I think a big thing too I would look at is the odds when you're getting about 10, 15 minutes, probably more like 10 minutes from post. What are the odds on this horse? Because if the horse is kind of cold on the board, I think if you got a price on the horse, I'd be a little bit more intrigued. But if this horse is second choice, I definitely am kind of leery of that.
Okay. As always, before we move on to our next race, I always ask you, how would you play this, Ashley?
I got to put Jackie's Warrior on top. This horse is going to be a really short price. But for me, I think the big thing here, I try to play a trifecta, because the way I view it is if Jackie's Warrior were to win and say a horse like Essential Quality or Reinvestment Risk is second, your exact is going to be really small. So for me, I would probably single the 7 on top, and then underneath I would use the 5 and the 9, and then the 3, 5, and the 9. You could probably add a couple other horses for third in here if there were other prices that you liked. I think the 13 Rumbauer is a horse I would maybe use for third in a try. Horses 15 to 1 morning line. But for me, I think this is Jackie's Warriors race all the way.
All right. Let's move on to Saturday. The big, which, by the way, are you going to be there? Are you headed?
I am leaving tomorrow morning at 6:30. Yeah, I need to find some of that energy that you have, because I certainly don't at the moment, but I'll get there.
Well, today I golf today, so it's bittersweet. It's kind of like how I think the Breeders' Cup. I'm feeling about the Breeders' Cup. It's kind of like golf season. I know it's coming to an end, and today was like 60s here in New Jersey, so I was able to tee it up. Not that I played very well, I have to admit. But yeah, I today was like a day off, so at least you
enjoyed yourself, right?
The weather was beautiful, so and then now here I am with you, a nice little break from the stress of what's going on in politics right now. So I was looking forward to this tonight. So let's talk about the Saturday races, Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, and let's kick it off. You've got a few horses that you have highlighted here. And so let's kick it off with the 7th horse. What is it? Is it Leinster? I want to say, right? Am I pronouncing that properly?
Yeah, Leinster is what I read. That's the good thing about social media is like a lot of people are on there, and I saw someone tweet out today that it is named after somewhere in Ireland, and it is called Leinster, not Leinster. Leinster.
Okay,
so you learned something new. Yeah, I think looking at this horse as far as a 4 to 1 morning line, I think that's a pretty good price to kind of start with. For me, this is a horse that really likes Keeneland, is 3 for 4. And the worst place, finish you see is a second. So it's really performed in all 4 starts at Keeneland quite well. Big thing, you look at those last 2 races, they were at Keeneland, but 2 races back, that was all the way in July. So this horse is only making the second start back since July 11th. Won both of those races with triple-digit buyers. And this is a horse that doesn't need to be on the lead, can be just off the pace, can be a couple lengths back, and is going to have this big run in 2 really big performances. Has beaten several horses in here before, but I think that's the big thing about the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint is a lot of these horses kind of have faced each other already this year. We do have some fillies and mares in this race, but they've, kind of tackled the boys in the past or have this season. So it's interesting because you kind of see these horses, a lot of them flip-flop. I mean, if you look at this horse, I know we're going to talk about Extravagant Kid a little later. 3 starts back, Extravagant Kid beat Leinster. So very, very competitive field. But for me, I think Leinster, these turf sprints are interesting because some of these horses want to be in the front, and that's the only way they're going to win. Other ones are going to come from the back of the pack, and you're only going 5.5 furlongs, so you don't have that much time really. I mean, these are really quick races. So a horse like Leinster, I like personally. I always like having a horse that's kind of just off the pace, close enough, but not too far back. For me, this is just a really, really consistent runner. So I've been really impressed with what we've seen so far this year. Only 3 starts, and they've all been pretty nice races.
All right. Got Stormy. Of course, you know why I'm going to like this one because she's beaten up on the boys before. I love that. 5-year-old mare who in some of the research I've done, really has been more of a mile horse, but is now more of a sprinter. So how do you see that playing into this race? And, do you feel that she's still going to be favored coming into Saturday?
I think there's a good chance that she will go off as favored in here, but I do think this is going to be a betting race where there's not going to be a heavy favorite. I think we see that in the morning line, and that's the thing with the morning line. This is what someone thinks kind of the horses are going to go off at, and to me, I think 7-2 is fair. It's not a heavy favorite like you saw Jackie's Warrior 7-5. I mean, this is a horse that kicks back $9 on a $2 win ticket. I think the thing with her, you really kind of hit the nail on the head, is this is a horse that has been typically a miler throughout her career. And you look at her last year in her performances, I mean, she never missed the board. She had 4 wins out of 8 starts. And you see out of Santa Anita in the Breeders' Cup Mile, she tackled the boys there. She missed by a length and a half behind Uni, but a really nice performance from her. I think the interesting thing is her connections have always thought that a mile might be, and I heard it in an interview, just a little too far for her at times. And so in her last 2 races, they've cut her back. 2 back, she went 6.5 furlongs, and then last time out 5.5. And she's won both of those performances. And I think if you kind of look at the Breeders' Cup Mile or some of her other races, she kind of comes from off the pace a little bit. And then you can see in the Breeders' Cup Mile, she didn't have that late kick. She almost kind of got tired in those last couple jumps and, couldn't get the job done. But you see, she did have was on a narrow lead. I mean, you see it was, she was in the lead at one point by a head. We saw this actually a couple starts earlier this year, that she made the lead and then just didn't have that late punch, missed by a neck. So I do think the connections are right. She's really kind of taken to this whole idea of sprinting in her last 2. I will say she's faced the girls in both of them, but from a numbers standpoint, she's really kind of gotten into form. I think earlier this year, she really wasn't kind of firing on all cylinders, and now that they've cut her back in distance, it seems to be working quite well.
All right, let's talk about the 14th horse, Extravagant Kid. You mentioned her just a second ago, and you're looking at this as possibly your long shot.
Yeah, for me, this is probably my long shot play. I do kind of have reservations about using Extravagant Kid on top, but maybe for second or third. I really think the horse is going to offer some value. You see a new rider climbing aboard. This horse has kind of had a slew of riders ride him throughout his career. He's 7 years old, 45 times on the racetrack. We've seen him 14 wins. But, I mean, if you look at his races this year, he's had 6 of them. Kind of started the year off with a win, then kind of a bad performance, picked up another win where he won decent. I mentioned earlier he beat Leinster in that race. And then the big one is the Shakertown. That's a grade 2 that was on July 11th. Was very far back early on. I mean, almost dead last, made up ground. You see a horse, you're like, well, the horse finished 5th. That doesn't really matter. But the horse wasn't beaten by much. And I thought, considering the trip that he got and the performance, he kind of was a little bit slow at the start. It's not like he kind of had an inside trip. He had to go wide at one point. So I think that is a really big effort. And then look at the last 2 starts. Has missed by a neck and a half. But while I think those are good performances, this horse just typically doesn't have enough to get the win, which is why I'm going to use this horse underneath. The horse doesn't have any wins at Keeneland. I'm not super concerned about that. But when I was kind of price shopping in this race, this is a horse that I think would be one to certainly use.
All right. Last but not least, the 8th horse, Alexandra, apparently has been somewhat of a long layoff. Is that a concern at all coming in?
It's a little bit of a concern. I mean, we haven't seen her since a really big performance. I mean, from a buyer standpoint, it was equaled her career best. It was 101, which she ran the race before. But to me, it's a little bit of a concern just because it was such a big performance, and she beat the boys that day in the grade 1 Jaipur out at Belmont. But you see the horse has been working pretty consistently, the gaps in those works this fall. So I'm not really thinking that the horse, seems to be in form now, but it is a little bit of a concern that this horse hasn't been seen since June. Definitely kind of another reason why I'll use her underneath. But you look at other horses in here, they're only making their second or third start off the layoff. So it's a tough call on her for that reason.
Also, is this the second time she's racing on turf? Is that correct?
No, no, this one has been kind of strictly a turf horse. That's a horse that we're going to get onto later, though. I know what horse you're talking about in one of the other races. I think the horse's Valiance was kind of on the turf for a long time, kind of the opposite, only a couple dirt starts. But
Okay.
Alexandra has been really on the turf a lot. But the thing that maybe you're referring to is this one has raced on the turf twice against the boys and has beat the boys both times and has won both of those races. To me, I mean, the way the Jaipur kind of panned out for her, she got a beautiful trip from Joel Rosario. I mean, this horse was dead last early on, but you look at how quick they went. The setup was beautiful for her. But like you said, the big thing is we haven't seen this horse since June.
All right. As always, before we move on to our next race, how is Ashley going to play this when she goes on? I was going to say when you walk up to the window, but that's not the case. When Ashley goes online,
goes online, yeah, or unless there's machines open, yeah. For me, I'm gonna play probably a $10 exacta. I'm gonna use the 7 and the 12 on top with the number 14 extravagant kid for second. So that's about a $20 wager. And then I'm going to play a couple trifectas. Use the 7 and 12 on top with the 7, 12, 14. And then from there, I'm just actually going to probably use the 7, 8, 12, and 14. And I'm still going to look for another horse in here. One that we didn't talk about was the number 3, Imprimis, 4-1 morning line. This horse has technically won the last 2 starts, but was disqualified in the first start of 2020. I'm just not sure that this horse has faced the same competition as others. I thought the morning line was pretty short on the horse, so this would be maybe a horse to use underneath.
Okay, all right. The Breeders' Cup Mile. One interesting dynamic here is that most of the speed, from what I understand, drew outside. So how is that going to affect this race?
I think when you look at the field, factor this has early foot. Another horse is the number 10, Halliday. There's other horses in here that have shown early foot in the past. I don't think they need the lead. The big thing here, another thing to consider too, is we have a lot of horses in this race coming from Europe. We didn't really see that in the turf sprint, with this being a longer race at a mile. I mean, if you kind of go through the field, just top to bottom, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 6, and the 9 are all coming from Europe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's kind of a Euro heavy race, and just I think in a typical standpoint, if you're looking at this race, a big thing you'd want to look at too is the ground. Keeneland, it hasn't rained. It's been really great weather. It's supposed to be a beautiful forecast, so there shouldn't be a lot of moisture in the turf course. You can think about Europe. They're racing a lot on the turf, so they kind of race in all conditions. And you'll see sometimes the Euros handle that softer footing better than American horses. It just kind of depends on the horse. To me, this is a great betting race that I thought was pretty difficult to narrow it down and figure out who to use on top. This would be a race that I definitely think I'd have to spread. You'll kind of like this. I know I really like the 11, but a big horse to talk about too is the number 12, Uni. This is kind of your defending title winner of this race last year. Uni ran a really big performance, beat Got Stormy. The 3rd place finisher was Without Parole. And, Uni is interesting because it doesn't need to be close to the pace. I think last time out, if you're talking about in recent starts, that was probably the closest to the pace she was in several starts. And you can kind of see that from her run line in there. So to me, the 2 horses that I'm looking at, because I don't think they're going to be on the front end and I think they're going to get a good trip, would be the 11, Ivar, and then the number 12, Uni. I think we'll pull up the past performances for this in a minute. Let's see. Yeah, so starting with the number 11, Ivar. This is the horse that actually started the career in Argentina, went 3 for 3, and then came over here and has done quite well. The debut, it's always interesting when a horse makes their first start here. This horse had made, that last start in Argentina in June of 2019, and we didn't see this one for nearly a year. Didn't really show much from there. Didn't take a lot of play. Was kind of cold on the tote board. But in the next start, again, was cold on the tote board, but took him gate to wire at Churchill Downs, going a mile and a 16th on the turf. They gave this horse a little bit of time off. Finished 3rd in the Tourist Mile, which is a pretty big purse at Kentucky Downs, going a mile on the turf. They did go pretty quick, if you can see the times. That's for a race that's at a mile. Very, very quick kind of pace, and this horse still hung around for third, missed by less than 2 lengths. That's kind of wildly quick, 44-3 for the half for a mile race. You're thinking more about, a 6 furlong event on the turf, kind of having those sort of blistering fractions. But the big thing that I really loved was last time out, this horse did not make the lead and was able to close from off the pace in the grade 1 Shadwell Turf Mile here at Keeneland. And, drew clear by a length in the end and had a career best buyer. Getting a grade 1 here is different than a grade 1 in Argentina. And this is a horse that had typically done quite well kind of on the lead and now was able to kind of rally from that backpack early on to get the job done, beat a couple others in here. That race really kind of speaks volumes. And listen, this horse has never been well respected. This is, the morning line is a price that we've really never gotten on him, at least here in the United States. So I think 4-1 is a good price on him. I hope he stays around here. And I think with kind of this being such a competitive race, the horse won't be too far off from the morning line.
Just a quick note, Uni is with Chad Brown, who also has Raging Bull in this race as well. And from what I understand, is actually better on that firm turf. So are you looking at Raging Bull at all?
I would use him underneath. He wasn't it's really tough in these races, especially this is, like I said, probably one of the better races because I send you a list over and I emailed you today. I kind of got down to 4 horses, but there's probably like 6 or 7 that I considered and really had some sort of an opinion. And Raging Bull is one to use. I think for me, won the first race here of 2020. That was at Santa Anita in a grade 1. In the last couple of races, has picked up some minor shares, just hasn't gotten the job done. Others in here have beaten the horse. You are getting Jose Ortiz for Chad Brown. They do quite well together. Still a lot to like, but for me, there was still things to be desired. I mean, the horse last year in 2019 didn't win a race all year. I just thought if this horse is around 8-1, maybe I'd use the horse for third, but I'm not in love with the horse by any means.
All right, so let's talk about some of the horses you are in love with, and that's Digital Age, and drew the post number 6. And so, how is that going to play? Is that going to be beneficial in regard to being able to gain some ground coming into that first turn?
He's got post position 5. I think it's a fine spot in the starting gate. You're not too far out. You're not on the inside. This is a horse that really has never been towards the front pack ever in his career. This is a horse that wants to kind of rally from off the pace. The good thing about him is I thought last time out he was pretty far back early on, a little further than we had seen before, but still had a beautiful trip. And I think the fractions worked his way that he was able to kind of get the job done. Prior to that, he was a little closer to the pace. But for me, I really think the big thing is this is a horse that has really stepped up from the 3-year-old campaign to the 4-year-old year. When you think about other big horses, sometimes this isn't always the case. I love to see a horse that's kind of getting better with age. And in his case, this year, his worst finish was his first race back where he missed by half a length. And the winner breaking the rules came back to win next time out. I really, really like this horse, especially at 8-1. He's kind of gone off favored twice this year already. Last time out, didn't really get a lot of respect because he was jumping up from those optional claiming events all the way to a grade 1 race, but he really showed he kind of belongs in this caliber. And I really think he still has more potential that we might have not really seen on the racetrack yet.
All right. And last but not least, the one horse, Circus Maximus. Tell us all the reasons why you like this horse.
Yeah, so this one's out of the Aidan O'Brien barn, which doesn't, when you look at success here in North America, I mean, he has such a great training program, in Europe and here, sometimes he hasn't really found that same success. I will say off the get-go, 12-1 morning line. I think we're going to be closer to this than the price we got last year because I'm not sure what he was on the morning line last year, but I do think he was higher than when he went off at post time. You can see he really didn't offer much value last year in the Breeders' Cup Mile. The trip that he got, not ideal for him, but he was able to get 4th in there, closed from off the pace, behind Uni and got stormy. And I thought his first few races of 2020, they were decent. His first 3, I think the last 2, he's struggled. He really hasn't had that late kick, but he's coming back over here. He's done well with the travel again, so he's going to have to rebound. I definitely think he's a horse that I'm intrigued by him, but you look at his last race and it's not good. It's a pretty poor race. The turf was soft that day. He's been okay on a firm going before. He loved it out at Santa Anita and had a big performance. So for me, looking at the European runners, I think he's going to be probably in terms of odds towards the middle of them. The colt to his outside is probably going to take more play. So I was just kind of thinking that this horse has done well, here before with the travel, and maybe can rebound.
Okay, so I'm getting the sense that you're really feeling the 11 horse.
I do. I do. It's like I say it like reservations. Like I do. I think it's a tough race in the case of like Jackie's Warrior. I could tell you, I'm going to single Jackie's Warrior and felt confident. I don't have that sort of confidence in the number 11. So for me, I'm probably going to use, this is going to be interesting, probably 11 and 12 on top and Digital Age for second. To me, these are kind of the two that I would put up there. And then I maybe use Digital Age for second and Exacta. It'll kind of depends on odds to see how much I would play that for, maybe just a $5 Exacta. And then for the try, I'm thinking I probably do 11, 12 with 5, 11, 12. And then, like I said, I do like the one, so I would use him for third, but I would put a bunch of price horses in third. I wouldn't, use my same horses because I do think the 11 and 12, they're going to take a lot of play in here. So I think the big thing for me is I want to get a look at the horses, especially the European horses. That's been a great thing. I don't know how much you've been on Twitter lately. I've also tried to avoid it for other reasons. It's like unideal timing. It's like you have an election and you have Breeders' Cup, and they're the same week. What are the chances of that always happening? Kind of aggravating in some sense, but the good thing is there's been a lot of video. You can kind of look at some of the European contenders. Other kind of outlets have done a really good job covering the races. So I'd like to see kind of the horses on the track before I do that, and maybe handicap this a little further, just because there are so many European runners and you don't know how they do when they get off the plane. You don't know what the new the scenery does to them. So it's always a little bit of a tricky task.
Just out of curiosity, and I've told you this before, I love going to the track. I know it sounds bougie, but I typically, like, the times that I've been to the track have been like the Triple Crown, like Breeders' Cup, Kentucky Derby, Belmont here. Anyway, and so usually I go out there and I broadcast. I do like a 3 or 4 hour show, which hopefully once this pandemic is over and I get back into hosting live from the Belmont, I would love for you and Dan from ABR to come out. It'll be a blast. But I usually have, I get these great tickets from the folks over at Belmont, and I invite like maybe 5, 6 of my girlfriends, and they love going to the paddock right before the race. Like, they love it. They're like, okay, let's go. I want to go watch. I want to go see the horses. It's not about their number. It's not about the name. They don't know how to read, in cipher all the analytics you do. They want to go and they want to visually see the horses, and they love going out there. They love going to the paddock. They love watching them walk around. Like, what are you looking for? I'm just curious. Like, and
well, first off, I feel like I need more friends like yours, because when I love my friends. I'm not bad mouthing them. I slightly am, though. Is when we'd go to the paddock at Keeneland, for example, I'd be like, "Oh, that one looks so good." They'd be like, "Yeah, I know," but their backs were towards the horses and they were checking out the boys. That was just, they're good friends, but they're not racetrack friends. For me, I'm just kind of looking at the horses, how they're kind of acting. Are they on their toes? Are they acting up really bad? Some horses are just notorious for doing that. They have kind of quirks and antics. And, if you go to the track enough, or you kind of follow these horses on big days, you start to know what's maybe normal, what's not normal for these horses. You're kind of looking at if they're kind of sweating. That's a big thing, kind of what their condition looks like. I think with horses that ship from overseas, a big thing is just physically, do they look good? It could be a really strenuous ask of an animal to get on an airplane and go over the Atlantic or wherever they're coming from. And, some horses from race to race, hopefully, I know a big thing with Skydiver, they talk about for her, for example, loves to eat. It's a big sign for a horse. When they come back after a big race, do they have that appetite still? Are they eating up before their next race? So a lot of it's just kind of behavior and just physically what they look like.
I love that. A chick who likes to eat. And that opened the door right into our next race on Saturday. And you know, I love Swiss Skydiver, the Breeders' Cup Distaff. Let's talk about her and what your expectations. I mean, obviously, coming off of that Preakness win, I'm sure, I would imagine there's a lot of money that's going to be flowing her way. What are your realistic expectations for Swiss Skydiver on Saturday, Ashley?
I mean, a lot of money is going to come in on her. I'm really curious to see who will go off as the post time favorite because the other big horse in this race, at 8-5 morning line, I believe is Monomoy Girl. So actually kind of a little bit lower on the morning line. I think when you look at Swiss Skydiver, they really had confidence in her in the Preakness. I actually spoke to Robbie Alvarado prior, just a couple hours before the race when I was at Pimlico, and he had said that, he had been out there all week getting to know her, and each time he got aboard her in the mornings, he was learning a little bit more about her, because she's had a lot of different riders throughout her career, and he had never been aboard her. And the whole story about him getting kind of the mount kind of last minute and how that whole situation played out. And you ask the jockeys, like, do you like your horse? And you're just kind of having friendly conversation. And he's like, I love her. I mean, she's really, really talented. And I think the performance that she put down was one of the best races I've ever witnessed in person. It was weird because there wasn't many people there, obviously, with all the COVID protocols and being spectator free. But this filly has a huge, huge heart, really, really game performance. And the Kentucky Oaks finished second. Prior to that, won the Alabama. She's really done nothing wrong. She seems pretty professional. We mentioned earlier, this is a filly that's gone to a lot of tracks in her career. So I love her. I love that performance last time out. And there was talk about her going to the Classic. They opted for this spot. For their, they had a choice to make. They decided to go here rather than the Classic. I think the Classic is a really big field, really competitive. So I can't fault them if they thought this was a better spot for her. But you have to love what she did last time out. I think the whole story kind of is really cool as well.
Okay, you mentioned Monomoy Girl. So what is it about her that you feel that potentially she could pull the upset?
I mean, I don't know if it'd be an upset because she is the morning line favorite. I think there's kind of two camps here, the Swiss Skydiver camp and the Monomoy Girl. I mean, this is a 5-year-old mare who had a stellar 3-year-old campaign. You look at those races in 2018, she won 6 of 7. She landed 1 second place finish, was in the Goldenrod at Churchill Downs. But she won the Oaks, she won the Acorn, and then she won the Cotillion. And then, the interesting thing with her is she had a little bit of a break. They put her, let me go back to the Cotillion. That's the race that she didn't win. She technically won it, but was disqualified. She won the Coaching Club American Oaks prior to that. But in the Cotillion, she went in that grade 1 performance, that sort of race there, ran a really big number. It was her career best at that time. There was some contact made, and she was disqualified. Midnight Bizou was put up as the winner. And I know we were talking about Midnight Bizou when we kind of started these shows in a couple races because she was the big mare. There's a lot of talk about her. If she kind of stayed in form, would she maybe be in the Classic? But she kind of did suffer an injury and was retired. So we saw her once more in 2018, and then that was it. We didn't see her at all in 2019. She never made a race as a 4-year-old. We didn't see her until this past May. And since then, she's won all 3 of her starts this year. She's kind of stepped up in class in each of them. And her connections think she's better than ever. I mean, she had a stellar 3-year-old year. And I can't stress this enough that horses, when they go from 3 to 4, they might not be the same. When you're talking about girl horses, which I know you love these fillies and these mares, you think about Rachel Alexandra and you think about Zenyatta. Zenyatta she was a monster, and age, as she got older, she was still really, really good and kind of getting better. Where in the case of Rachel Alexandra, I think a lot of people would probably agree with this, but Rachel as a 3-year-old versus Rachel as a 4-year-old, she was not as good of a 4-year-old as she was during her 3-year-old campaign. I mean, she was at her prime. Now you're talking about a horse that was at their prime at 3 years old, never saw this horse for a really long time, and then comes back at 5, overcomes the long layoff, and is firing on all cylinders. I mean, you have to respect her. She's won 12 of 14.
That is really impressive. I'm really excited to watch this race. That's for sure. Another horse you mentioned is the 4 horse, New Jersey bred. Hey now.
Yeah. This is something that you're not gonna. Yeah, you should like this one now too. I'm giving you like all your favorite things, right? Horologist is interesting. Horologist had to be supplemented into this race, so we really haven't talked to this before. But not all horses are nominated for certain things. You might not be nominated to the Triple Crown. You may not be nominated to the Breeders' Cup. And they think about it in a simpler case, there might be a stakes race, and you decide not to nominate right away or enter a stakes race. Well, later on, you can go to supplement, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. In the case that this costs them a considerable amount of money to come in this spot. In the case of this New Jersey bred, you look at her, she's really interesting because last year she won 4 of 8. She was kind of in 2 different barns. She was on the East Coast for a while. Then she kind of traveled around between the East Coast and the West Coast, but since joining the barn of Bill Mott, you have to give him hats off. I mean, she's really turned the quarter, especially late in her 4-year-old year. He's only had 3 starts in Bill Mott's barn. The worst performance was 2 back, which was a 3rd place finish, which is still respectable because the winner was Monomoy Girl. But for me, you look at the Molly Pitcher. We'll go back to that first start in the Bill Mott barn. It was a grade 3. Our Super Freak is a horse that's kind of traveled on the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic, and has been a nice horse. But Horologist, ran a really big race, but really didn't get the class test. So the La Troyenne would have been a huge class test for her. Was 3rd, beaten by 4.5 lengths behind Monomoy Girl. And you kind of look at the setup of how that race panned out. I mean, Monomoy Girl, just kind of set off the pace a little bit, made the move. This one was a little bit further back and really kind of closed the gap. But the reason that they decided to supplement this horse is because the performance last time out at Belmont was a really big performance. Beat several horses in here, Point of Honor, Dunbar Road. And it was a really, really nice performance to watch visually. So this is a horse that has had 2 triple-digit buyers this year. Is going to be kind of an outsider just because it has to face, Monomoy Girl again. Now you're putting this Skydiver into the mix. But for me at 8-1 morning line, this is a horse that I would certainly, give a look to.
All right. And last but not least, the 8th horse.
Yeah, this is Valiance. This is a Todd Pletcher. She's a 4-year-old filly by Tappet. $650,000 purchase a couple of years ago. Pretty hefty. And you kind of look at this. Only 8 starts under her belt, 6 wins. She either wins or she kind of isn't there at all. But the big thing with her is started the career as a 3-year-old on the turf and won 3 races in a row. Then we didn't see this one for nearly a year, 11 months between that race at Monmouth in June of 2019 and that first race back at Gulfstream Park. That race was going to be on the turf, was moved to the dirt, kept her in the spot. Really didn't show a great performance by any means, was 4th, finished mid-pack, beaten by 3 lengths. I will always say, that first time on the dirt's kind of interesting for me. There's nothing to take away from that. But the big thing is look at those performances since then. Next time out, ran a bad race. It was going 1.25 miles on the turf. And then they cut this horse back in distance. They returned to kind of as more of a typical distance, 1.1 miles. One kind of an okay race at Colonial, won by a nose. But for me, it's the next 2 races that stand out dramatically because they're the best performances from buyer numbers and they're both on the dirt. 2 starts back in the Eatontown, which is a little like kind of a stakes race at Monmouth Park. It was scheduled for the turf, moved to the dirt, and it wasn't a big field. It was only 5 runners, but this horse just sat right off the pace over the sloppy track, closed to win by 1.5 lengths, so it was kind of clear of the field. And then next time out, they said, okay, we're going to go in the grade 1 Spinster, going 1.8 miles at Keeneland. Kind of a similar trip, won by 3/4 length, and that's the career best effort. So this is a horse that has stepped up, performed well, and actually can handle the dirt when for a while we're just seeing her on the turf. So she's going to be a price, kind of going to be an outsider in here. I really don't see anyone beating Monomoy Girl or Swiss Skydiver. I think, everyone that kind of looks at the race, they probably like one over the other a little bit more. I do think it's kind of hard to separate them, so it's going to be interesting to see them square off. But Valiance, this is a horse that could certainly get a little bit of a piece.
Okay, so how are you going to play it? Obviously, the 5 and the 10 on top, right? Am I pressuring you to say Swiss Skydiver? Do you feel the pressure here?
That's who, if I was like, I don't know, if I was in a situation where I had to answer and my life depended on it, I would say Swiss skydiver.
Okay.
That's tough. I struggle here too because I think from an exotic standpoint, unless you're really loaded and have lots of money to spend and you're going to really hammer an exacta, there's no value to me. And there's still no value in that in my mindset to play a 5-10 exacta of sorts or a 10-5, whatever you like. So I think in terms of bets, the Breeders' Cup Mile was the race before this. I'd probably look at the late pick 4 and try to find prices elsewhere. I just don't think there's a lot of value here. So for me, if I go to play an exacta or a trifecta, I'd be using the 4 and the 8 kind of underneath in the second and third spots, just in case something fluky happens where Swiss Skydiver and Monomoy don't finish 1-2 or reverse order. But I don't think there's a lot of value in this race. But I think from a race to watch, I think this is going to be a really great race.
It sounds like it. All right.
We'll find out soon enough.
And obviously, we've saved the best for last. And that's the Breeders' Cup Classic. Really excited about this race. So let's start with the horse that we know is going to be the favorite. That's the 4 horse.
Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't think he'll be the favorite. When I sent you the email, I put them in the order of my preference. So your favorite. Yes, my favorite. That's how I like it. I don't want him to be the favorite. I want more money, Anita.
Let's not bury your lead. So let's start with your favorite. So
I went with Tons d'Etat. I'm kind of looking at the rankings for a long time as far as the Breeders' Cup, kind of the classic rankings on the road to this race. He was kind of the top dog for a really long time. I mean, you're talking about a 7-year-old who, you look at him kind of late last year as a 6-year-old. He was kind of getting into form in the fall. Looked like he was feeling good. Really big performances at Keeneland and then at Churchill in the Clark. And then you look at 2020. He's now a year older at the age of 7. And to me, he's just been a horse that age has been kind of no issue for him. I mean, he has those 2 wins. One was in the Oaklawn Mile. He beat Improbable that day. Now, that was just going a mile. This is a horse that I think wants to go further than a mile. Then came back to win the Stephen Foster, which if you're kind of thinking of for older horses, there's 2 big races at Churchill. You're thinking kind of the Clark and you're thinking the Stephen Foster, one in the fall, one in the spring. He won the fall race of 2019, and then he came back in the spring to win that premier event and was just an easy win. Just kind of drew clear, and compared to some of his other races, he was pretty close to the pace. He's done that a couple times throughout his career, but we've also seen him kind of try to rally from off the pace. Now, last time out, well, that was all the way back in August. We haven't seen him since the Grade 1 Whitney at Saratoga. He was the favorite in there. Short field, I thought it was a competitive field. Improbable was in there by my standards. In his case, the break cost him any sort of contention in the race. He stumbled at the break. He was kind of slow from there. And in the case of Improbable, who in here is kind of like the lukewarm morning line favorite, everything set up beautifully for Improbable. You couldn't have asked for a better trip. So I really just think everything was stacked against him. He has been able to run well off a layoff before, which is why I have more confidence in him. To me, it's kind of a little concern when they're older. I think about, I don't know, I'm getting older and by no means am I old, but some things are not as easy to do after you haven't done them in a while. And in the case of a horse like this, it would be a concern. But for him, this is a decision that the Connections made. And it wasn't that they just made it all of a sudden. This was kind of a thing that they were going to do. We're not going to really race him up into the Classic. And he seems to be doing quite well. I'm going to use him. I think he had every excuse last time out. And before that, he was a monster.
Was Rosario his jockey?
Yeah, Rosario rode him last time out. He had ridden him several times before that. He kind of look at his races in the last 2 years or so. Sean Bridgemahan was his rider for a long time. And then Joel Rosario has ridden him in 4 of his last 5 starts.
Okay. All right. So in regard to Improbable, and you feel that Improbable will be favored coming into this race?
He's the morning line favorite at 5-2, and then from there, you kind of look at the other horses. You have a 7-2 shot, a 3-1 shot. So you got a lot of horses in that same kind of price where they're only gonna, they're off by like $2 if you think in terms of win payouts, or even $1. I think I really don't know what's gonna happen. Improbable is a horse that I've said on this show, and I've said way too many times that I care to admit. I've never really liked him. It's just like one of those things. I was actually listening to Dan earlier. He's not a big Whitmore fan. I mean, there's just some horses that you like. There's nothing wrong with him. He really, actually, Dan knows this. This horse bit me really good at Preakness in 2019. Has nothing to do with that, but yeah, I'll have to show you photos sometime.
Okay,
Pretty
well,
nice.
wait a minute. Wait, time out. Okay, so what were you feeding it? A carrot, an apple?
I was doing a segment on Preakness Day right outside his stall.
Right.
That was going to be on the Pimlico feed. And I was
Right.
talking, just talking about, Bob Baffert's looking for his, I don't know how many Preakness wins. He's got a lot of Preakness wins. And, it's just being kind of playful at first, but you're trying to look at the camera and like pet the horse. And then at one point, I don't know, he just like latched onto my hand and was like, thought he was playing. And I was just in the middle of this and my legs started to shake. So I'm like, this doesn't tickle. And yeah, has nothing to do with that. I think the big thing with Improbable is I looked at him as a 3-year-old and
Wait,
I thought
time out. Did he draw blood?
barely any blood, but I did have a bruise that took like a good chunk of my hand over. And it was bruised. And then you know what happens with bruises and they turn to like yellow. It's not really pretty to look at. Do you have any other questions before I actually move on to why I wasn't an Improbable fan?
I'm just fascinated with this story, and I think you're lying. I think this has a lot to do with it. But
has nothing to do with it because I actually didn't like him because when you go back to the Preakness last year, I believe he was the morning line favorite and he was the post time favorite. And he was just a horse that I don't know. I felt like he was kind of overhyped. He had run some big races, but he still kind of was, second back to back. He got placed up to 4th in the Derby when Maximum Security was disqualified. I thought the Preakness, I just didn't care for him. And so that kind of solidified because I really didn't play him much ever in his next couple starts. And he never really performed really big. I mean, you kind of look at him as a 3-year-old, he won 1 race out of 7 starts. So that's probably why I didn't like him. I just thought he was kind of overhyped. Now,
so maybe that's why he bit you, because he knows that you didn't like him.
I know. They just sense it, right? They do, though. They do.
I'm sure.
But the biggest thing with Improbable, this is a horse that I always thought was just a miler. That's why I thought in the Preakness and I thought in the Derby, I thought a 1.25 mile and 3/16 wasn't going to be a good distance for him. Then they cut him back to a mile. He won. I was like, that proves my point. And then this year, he's just been, again, this is a horse that's gotten really better with age from a 3-year-old campaign that was to a 4-year-old year that, well, he's won 3 of 4 starts and he's won his last 3 races. They've all been grade 1s. His first race that he won, kind of looking at this year, was the Gold Cup out at Santa Anita. It was going 1.25 miles, and he showed that distance didn't matter. He showed that in the Whitney. He showed that in the Awesome Again. I mean, he has just really kind of hit his peak, and I think that's why he's the morning line favorite. He's beaten several horses in here. I think, Tom's Data, as I mentioned earlier, did beat him in the Oaklawn Mile, but he's beaten a lot of runners in here, including his stablemate Maximum Security, by my standards, higher power. So just off of that alone, he is hard to ignore. And I've actually, I'm using him. I have wrote him down as my second choice in here. I do think he has a really big shot. And he arrived yesterday to Keeneland. Today he had his first kind of trip over the track, and I did see some video, and he looked spectacular.
It's interesting, right? Because like we've been doing this all season, and so we've been talking about these horses at length all season, and so again, a lot of familiar names here, like Maximum Security, Tis the Law, Authentic. I mean, just going through, there's a lot of speed in this race. A lot of speed. This is going to be a fun race as well. Tell us about Maximum Security. How do you think he'll do in this race?
So the big thing with Max is that I think people, since, everything that shook out with Jason Service and, the Derby last year, he's he's either been loved or he's been kind of, I don't want to use the word hated, but strongly disliked. Okay. And I think, can't fault the horse for whatever has happened to him. I think kind of looking at him this year, his last 3 races, I mean, his first race back, a lot of people weren't a huge fan of the performance, I thought, off the layoff. And considering everything that he had gone through, he had traveled overseas to Saudi Arabia, came back. I had no problems with the performance. I thought it was good. I didn't think it was a wow performance, but he still got the job done. First start back, coming back to the U.S. So I thought that was good. Mix him out. He wins the Pacific Classic. It's the grade 1. It's kind of the premier event when you're thinking about Del Mar. He didn't face any horses that were spectacular. I mean, a lot of people for a while did like Midcourt. He was talked about, but he kind of wasn't that front runner horse. And then last time out, he had to square off with his stablemate, and he was simply second best to Improbable, which I think is a little bit of a concern for a lot of people, just knowing that, well, Improbable's beat him now. That wasn't the case last year. So I don't want to take too much away from it. Bob has been kind of, in a lot of his interviews, has talked about this in terms of, his first race back. Bob said, I didn't have him, up to 100%. I wasn't working him, kind of maybe just trying to figure out where he was at. And then I think this is kind of where they really are prepping him for the Classic. So I don't think it would be shocking to see him run his best race of the year. But I'm a little reserved here. I mean, you mentioned it. It's such a great field. You got 10 runners in here. I mentioned I didn't even write Authentic down, but you're talking about a horse that his last couple of races, they've been huge. So you could sit and go through this whole field, and there's probably only 2 or 3 horses that I would kind of toss to the side and say I'm not going to bet them. I can't consider betting them would be a better way to say it.
Well, one, like in the previous race, we were just talking about Swiss Skydiver. And, I think a lot of money is going to be thrown her way, obviously because of her last performance. But same, don't you feel, with Tiz the Law? Don't you think a lot of money is going to be thrown at Tiz the Law?
Yeah, he's kind of, he's 3-1 morning line. This is why I said when you had said he's probably going to be the favorite. I don't know what the betting public's going to do on this race. I mean, you look at Tiz the Law and going into the Triple Crown in general, the reverse kind of mixed up order, however that worked, Belmont, Derby, Preakness. This was the hype horse. The Belmont, big performance. Then the Travers, to me, I mean, yes, it was his best buyer number. It was a 109, which is ridiculous. That's bonkers to me. That's a huge number. Visually, the way he looked in that race was stellar. One of the best performances I think we've seen this year. But the Derby, I don't want to take anything away from him. He was second, beaten by a length and a quarter. And you look at the trip that Authentic got, and it was a beautiful, beautiful trip from John Velasquez. But Tiz the Law just didn't have that same punch. I mean, he's shown this ability to kind of draw off on these fields and keep on going, and he didn't that day. We talked a lot about this kind of leading up to these Triple Crown races, but the calendar was very different. And this is a horse that went to the Belmont, then went to the Travers, then to the Derby. It is a lot to ask of a horse. They decided after the Derby they weren't going to go to the Preakness. I personally think that was the right move. I think the horse had kind of shown himself and had done a lot. Yes, I would have loved to see him in the Preakness. It would have been, a great race, but it's still an amazing race. I think it would have been great to see him there just because, so many people do respect him. But for me, I don't know. He's had some time off. He seems to be training well. But the last race, there was a little bit more that I think I desired out of the performance, but it was still huge.
Last horse I want you to handicap for us before you tell us how you're going to bet this race, and that is By My Standards.
I have seen this horse is kind of, he's a long shot. He doesn't take a lot of respect, especially kind of in these grade 1 races. And I've actually seen several people on Twitter and social media say that he's not a grade 1 horse. I don't think I agree with that. I think in the Whitney, he ran a pretty big second behind Improbable. We keep on talking about the field was compact, but at least it was competitive, almost top to bottom in there. I think, 4 out of the 5 runners were horses that I could endorse. And just look at him. I mean, this is a horse that as a 3-year-old, I liked him a little bit. And then obviously the Derby, he really didn't show anything. He finished 11th in the race. But this year, his worst finish has been a second place finish, for me, he's always kind of offering more value than others. And yes, Tom's D'Etat's beat him. Improbable has beat him. But last time out, his win was really nice at Churchill. He's another horse that we haven't seen since September. But I believe when I saw one of the clips, he's been training kind of better than ever. So I've always liked him. I know sometimes we talk about horses that we always like now that I'm kind of biased, but I don't think he gets as much respect as he should have. He's going to be a price. I mean, look at him. He's another horse. You know, we talk about all these big buyer numbers. In a race like this, they all have really big buyer numbers. A triple-digit buyer is not out of the norm, but he's really, you know, had a really strong showing his last 4 starts, and he's won 2 of them. So for me, he's a horse I will certainly use when I'm trying to find a price.
Okay. So break it down for us. How are you playing? How are you playing this on Saturday?
This makes me even just talking about it, my stomach kind of hurts because this is just like, to me, this is such a challenging race. I don't know if everyone agrees. Some people may just say like this is a 1-horse race. I don't know how anyone thinks that, just because the setup, it's the Breeders' Cup Classic, so we're all kind of waiting for. So for me, I like Tom's D'Etat. He's my top pick. I do think he still has a lot of things to answer. We haven't seen him since August. And then from there, I use Improbable. So for me, it's kind of the 4-8 are kind of my top horses. Other ones, though, I do like. I do think you have to look at Tis the Law. I do think you have to see Maximum Security. But like I said, I've talked about half the field, and I'm still not confident in here, which is scary. Makes me uncomfortable. But to me, I think it's Tom's D'Etat and Improbable are going to be my top 2 picks.
Fantastic.
Feverishly writing everything.
Are you? Of course I
Look at
am.
your notes.
Come on.
I love it.
You know me. I gotta get. Look, I'm like. Did you ever see Homeland? Do you see? You ever watch the show Homeland on HBO? I'm like Carrie, with the. Anyway,
got every color.
I got every color. So last thing I wanted to ask you is in regards to the weather. You know, what are the weather conditions expected to be like? Do you think that plays a factor at all? And also, I'm curious, is this the same time, you know, like next week? And again, I know I'm comparing apples and oranges here, but like next week is the Masters. The Masters isn't normally played in November. So there's a lot of changes that are happening in regard to the course and how the course is going to play for a lot of the golfers. Is this the same time frame?
You're always thinking kind of late October, early November. That's kind of when you think about it. I mean, that's why, like, I know I had to look this up recently. Like, the 1996 Breeders' Cup was on October 26th.
Okay.
Last year was I think it was like the 2nd or the 1st and the 2nd of November, I think were the dates. So this isn't like far off by any means. This probably could have been raced last weekend, but, you know, that's kind of just how the cookie crumbles and how things kind of fell. But this is typically where these races are run, kind of that last weekend in October, first weekend in November.
And the weather's supposed to be beautiful, right?
Yeah, the weather has been really good in Lexington the last few days, and kind of looking at the next few days ahead. I think it's supposed to get gradually warmer over the course of it. I don't think there's any rain in the forecast. I think tomorrow is supposed to be, last time I checked, knock on wood, just a little bit of overcast, mid-60s. And then I think it's about a high of 66 or 67 Friday, and then 70, 72 on Saturday with sunshine. So weather-wise, I know they had gotten some wet weather, you know, I think even last weekend and late last week. But in terms of the turf course, what they've done is they do this at a lot of places. Especially for the Breeders' Cup, when these horses come over, they allow you to kind of train on the turf a little bit. They put cones out, which will protect the inside of the turf course while, you know, still letting the horses on kind of the outside of the turf course. So they've been doing that. So, I mean, the turf course should be drying out with each day that passes. In terms of the dirt, I think the big thing when you think about dirt and how it plays, a lot of it has to do with track maintenance. You know, just depending how they maintain the track and what they do to it has a lot with how it plays in general. But I don't think, you know, we should be fast and we should be firm. So ideal conditions that for a lot of horses, there shouldn't be a ton of excuses.
All right. A few things I want to mention before we close out, and that is, number one, good friend of mine, Ron Lombardi from the Mr. Amori Stables, Forenzi Fire, is going to be running in the sprint on Saturday at 2:30. So I want to give him a shout out. He's a phenomenal human being. And I asked him, I texted him, I said, do you feel good about it? And he said he's got a good shot to win. So are you familiar with Forenzi Fire? Are you?
Yeah, I mean, he's been racing for a while. He's been pretty competitive. He's a horse that you've seen. I think he kind of likes New York a little bit, but coming here, he's been fun to kind of watch over the years.
So just a shout out to Ron and Mr. Amore Stables. Also, Rob Masiello. I have to give Rob Masiello a shout out because all season long, Ashley, he has helped me prepare for the show each and every week.
He told me.
Yes, copious amounts of notes and little nuggets that I can bring to the table to help the show and sound somewhat in the know about horse racing. So Rob, I just want to thank you so much for helping me this season. I love you, man. And your notes are ridiculous and we so appreciate it. And also I want to thank ABR, America's Best Racing, for bringing me on board to work with you, Ashley, because, I'm not shy about this. I think you're a rock star and I've learned so much from you. And I've so much enjoyed the season working with you. So, so thank you. I feel like it's been an honor and a privilege.
It's been so much fun. You don't realize it, not especially when we first started this, because we both weren't going to the track. I've been to the track a little bit in New Jersey, at the Meadowlands and at Monmouth Park, and then the Preakness, but no one was doing anything, especially in the first few months of the pandemic, right? And so at least horse racing was one of the sports that were continuing, to have races run at a lot of tracks. But, you sit at home most of the day and you watch it. You don't get to talk about it. And my biggest thing is I think the racetrack is a place you can take people and you can teach them. They might like other sports. They might not like sports at all. But I think someone can go to the racetrack and leave the racetrack with at least liking something about their day out, whether it was a day out and they had a couple drinks or just kind of people watching the horses, the excitement of the race, betting, whatever it is. I think it's a great thing. And I think having the show is something that I look forward to. I liked being able to teach you things, but I love that you asked questions and you brought in a lot of sports knowledge, which I basically only watch hockey for the most part and some football, except for I do love the Kentucky Wildcats. So I'm a big basketball girl when it comes to UK, but I don't follow everything like you do. It blows my mind. I've watched some of your other stuff and I'm like, yep, don't know really what's going on. Don't know who so-and-so is, but this has been so much fun. And I know when kind of the idea had come up about doing something like this, they kind of picked a better person to do it with because you're so much fun and you're totally in it. You're not like, oh, let's talk about horses. You're like, I want to learn, I want to make money, and it's a lot of fun. So it's been a blast.
I take notes, and you do win me money. So that's a perk. It's a perk. Anyway, thank you so much again, everybody. Enjoy this weekend, and make sure to follow Ashley on social media. She's always constantly posting as we get closer to the race, always great nuggets and special things. And again, America's Best Racing, the only place to really get in the know and get ready for this weekend's Breeders' Cup. So enjoy, and thank you for watching.